All right, everybody, let's go ahead and get started. So once again, my name is Kevin Hancock, Director of Solutions here at Exostar. And thanks for joining me today for our webinar, Policies for the Future, Adapting to New CMMC and NIST Requirements. During today's session, we're going to be talking about Exostar's Policy Pro application. As part of that, I've got a colleague on the line, David Rowe, who's going to be doing a demonstration of Policy Pro to show you how it works. If you'd like to follow along with him while he does that, we do have a free trial of Policy Pro that you can sign up for and get ready and follow along with him. I'm going to do a short intro about CMMC and kind of where we are in the rulemaking process before David does the demonstration. So you'll have plenty of time to sign up for it and follow along if you'd like to. So before I dive into the formal presentation, just want to cover a few housekeeping details. So today's session is scheduled to last 45 minutes to an hour. That does include Q&A. Now, we typically we ask for questions when you sign up, and we make sure we cover those at the end of today's session. However, we didn't get any, but that's okay. You can also submit questions via chat. I've got a colleague on the line who'll be monitoring chat and answering those questions as they come over. If for some reason we do have an outage during today's session, just wait for a minute and refresh the page. That should bring you back into the webinar. If not, you can always use the link you receive via email to come back into the session at any time. Now, today's session is being recorded, and after today's session, you'll receive a link to the recording of today's session. You also will get a copy of today's slides. That's typically always one question we get over chat. So you will get the slides and you will get a link to the presentation. If you'd like to speak with one of our industry experts, you can reach out to us a couple of different ways. You can email us at cmmc-team@exostar.com, or if you go to our website, www.exostar.com, there's a chat feature there on every page, and we can answer your questions via that channel as well. So as I mentioned, I'm being joined today by David Rowe of our partner ISMS Solutions. David, you want to take a minute and introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks, Kevin. Hi, everyone. My name is David Rowe. I'm the Business Development Manager here, and I'll be showing the platform and demonstrating its capabilities today.
Great, thanks, David. So as I mentioned, I'm going to first cover just kind of where we are in the CMMC ruling, and then provide a brief overview of Policy Pro and its benefits and functions. Then I'll turn it over to David for the demonstration, and then we'll wrap up. So kind of where we are in today's kind of ruling around CMMC. So hopefully you know that 32 CFR, and CFR stands for the Code of Federal Regulations, that actually went into effect in December 16th of 2024. What that did is that allowed the CMMC program to begin. And what I mean by to begin is that it formalized the CMMC certification process, put in place the assessment guides, and the accreditation bodies that oversee that. So you may start to see, and you already are seeing, people starting to go for CMMC accreditation. They're contacting those C3PAOs, those certified third-party assessment organizations, to go ahead and make sure they're compliant. Now, the one thing that isn't yet formalized and out there is 48 CFR. 48 CFR is the Code of Federal Regulations, which will actually put the CMMC into the DoD contracts. So that's when you'll start to see those clauses show up in the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulations, or those DFARS clauses that are typically part of your contract. Just to level set everybody about kind of what the differences of CMMC when you start to see it in contracts are. Understand that the major difference that CMMC is going to bring to the table is that for certain organizations, you're going to be required to have a third party assess how you're fulfilling NIST 800-171 controls. And if you're going for a higher level, you'll have a DIBCAC assessment. I'll cover that in just a minute. It also further refined a couple of different terms that are out there. One of the things it did was define what a cloud service provider is and what requirements those have to meet if you're utilizing a cloud service to fulfill part of your requirements around NIST 800-171. Now, NIST 800-171, just to remind everybody, is something that's been in effect since about 2013. And the way it's been put into contracts is that there are DFARS clauses that say that, if you receive controlled unclassified information as part of your contract, you need to ensure that you secure it in accordance with NIST 800-171. And NIST 800-171 is the National Institute of Standards guidelines, which control how you must secure controlled unclassified information in systems, in commercial systems, right? Those that are not federal government systems, right? So all of us contractors who work for the federal government or primes are required to secure information in this manner. What it also defined are the requirements around an external service provider. An external service provider are things like MSPs or MSSPs, the managed service provider or the managed security service providers, those third parties you may engage with to perform an IT function for you. Maybe they do things like manage a portion of your IT organization. Maybe you outsource all of your IT organization to them. Maybe you use them just to maintain firewalls or things like that, or to oversee your log files and that type of activity. So the assessment guide lays out what the requirements of those cloud service providers, right? In the cases of those CSPs, you must be a FedRAMP moderate cloud service provider. That means you show up in the FedRAMP marketplace, or you have a third-party assessment of meeting the equivalent standard of FedRAMP. And if you're an external service provider, then the things you do to protect that organization are going to be assessed as part of that overall system boundary that your organization is putting forth as their SSP, their system security plan. And the thing we're going to talk about today with Policy Pro is an application that allows you to define those policies for the NIST 800-171 control families. Now, obviously, we've had an administration change since last year, and there's been a number of presidential orders that have affected things. One of those things is there is a regulatory freeze that was put in place when President Trump took office. Now, this doesn't affect the 32 CFR, right? That's already in place. It went in place in December. But it does affect the 48 CFR. Now, it's going to affect it in most likely just that it's probably delaying the process a little bit, right? It's going through another review process around that. Now, the thought is in the CMMC community is that it will still, come into place. The CMMC program was actually a priority under the first Trump administration. A number of the folks, including the DoD CIO, Katie Arrington, was a big proponent of CMMC. She was one of the founders of the program. And so we fully expect it to continue to be a priority in the current Trump administration. So we do still expect to see it in place in 2025. It's just a matter of kind of when it will actually go into place. Now, what CMMC does, just to level set everybody, is it has a requirement based on the level in which you're going to participate. Now, your level of participation is going to depend on the contracts that you have with the Department of Defense or with those folks who have contracts and subcontract to you. Right? If I'm subcontracted to a holder of a DoD contract, then requirements flow down to me as part of my subcontractor responsibility. And those flow downs are going to be the same, kind of those DFARS clauses, which say what they have to do. It also governs what their entire supply chain has to do. So it breaks those requirements down into 3 levels: level 1, level 2, and level 3. Now, level 1 is the majority of the defense industrial base. 63% of the organizations, it's estimated, will just be level 1. And in those cases, you have 15 requirements that you have to meet. Those 15 requirements are a self-assessment that you meet those requirements, and then an annual affirmation from a leader in the business that you continue to do that. Now, level 2 is bifurcated. What that means is there are kind of 2 level 2 kinds of organizations. One of those will allow a self-assessment, but that's a very small portion of the level 2. Additionally, the person who makes that representation of what the requirement is going to be the contracting officer. So the contracting officer, when they determine the requirements of a contract, will tell you whether or not this one is okay for a self-assessment or it's going to require that third-party assessment. As I mentioned, small percentage, right? Less than 2% of organizations are going to follow into that self-assessment. The majority, that 35%, are going to require that third-party assessment. That's going to be a once every 3-year third-party assessment. You'll need to reach out to a C3PAO, a certified third-party assessment organization. You can find a list of those at the cyberab.org. That's the website. That's the organization that manages the accreditation of those organizations and individuals who are involved in the CMMC process. One of the things they do is certify those third-party assessment organizations as qualified to provide those assessments. So they have a list of all these available. You sign up with one of those to come and do the third-party assessment once every three years. They'll pass you or fail you. If they pass you, they'll register you and register that assessment. If you don't pass, you'll have to fix those problems and then re-engage with them. Level 3 is a small portion of the defense industrial base, right? Less than 1%. Those level of organizations not only have to satisfy those NIST 800-171 requirements, but there are 24 other controls from NIST 800-172 that are also part of the assessment for those organizations. Now, the assessments for those are, again, once every 3 years, but those assessments will be done by DIBCAC, not by a C3PAO. Now, in all these cases, when we talk about NIST 800-171, we're talking about NIST 800-171 R2. That's revision 2. Now, there is a revision 3 available from NIST, but the CMMC guidelines specifically call out NIST 800-171 R2. As you go through that third-party assessment, if you're missing a control or if they determine that a control isn't fully met, if it's one of the controls which is only worth 1 point, and it's a certain control within that list, then it's okay to have. They won't pass you, and you'll have 180 days to fix that control, and then re-engage with that third party, tell them what you're doing, have them then assess it and okay it, and then pass you going forward. Now, when CMMC does take into effect, DoD has determined that there'll be a phased-in implementation period. That's what you see here on this slide. So for that first 12 months, it's determined that level 1 and level 2 will continue to be a self-assessment as it is today. Right? The current DoD requirements around NIST 800-171 are that you meet the NIST 800-171 controls, that you self-assess. That'll continue for that initial year. After that initial year, that's when you're going to start to be required to have that level 2 certification. And you'll have to do it when you bid on the contract. So you'll have to have that certification done before you bid. Phase 3, after the second year, that's when you'll start to require those level 3 certifications. And then phase 4 will be the full implementation of the program. Now, please keep in mind that bottom little blue box there, the DoD can implement portions of this for particular contracts earlier if they so choose. So if there is a particular critical program or particular area that they want to focus upon, they could require those third-party assessments prior to the phase period you see here. It's all going to be based on the contract. Now, as I mentioned, the requirement to be in compliance with NIST 800-171 has gone back to about 2013. That's when the DFARS clause 252, 204, 7012 started to appear in DoD contracts. That clause required you to ensure that you meet NIST 800-171 if you receive controlled unclassified information. A few years later, another clause, 7019, was also included, so you have two of these. What 7019 says is that if you receive controlled unclassified information, you need to perform a self-assessment and you need to score that self-assessment. As part of that, NIST came out with the NIST 800-171 Alpha. That's the assessment guide. That provided a scoring system for each of the different controls and then allowed you to perform that score. And your score is somewhere between a -203 and 110. You then take that score and you upload it into the supplier performance risk system. And the DoD uses that as one of the metrics as part of the overall supplier performance risk. So when they look to award a contract, that's one of the elements they use when awarding that contract. Now, what we're looking for and what, as you start to see Policy Pro in just a minute when David does the demonstration, we're talking about how do we implement those NIST 800-171 controls. Now, Policy Pro is going to be all about developing the policies that you need for those 14 control families. But when you start to customize the templates that David will show you as part of this, you've got to think about how you're going to customize those policies to fit your organization. And the best way to think about that is to actually think about how CUI flows through your organization. How do you receive the information? In this example, you see it's emailed into an organization. You think about the different functions or people in your organization that may actually need access to and may have to change that CUI, right? They've got to perform a function on that. They've got to build something to that specification. They need to take that and then diagram it out, things like that. You need to respond to an RFP based on these inputs that came as CUI. You're going to think about the different applications or tools that you use to manipulate that. And these may not be all IT systems, right? If you're a manufacturer, some of these may be, cutting machines and things like that. But think about the tools where that information may reside and the different IT systems where that information may be stored or processed. And then the different kinds of processes it goes through. And then obviously, when the contract ends, how do we remove this information? What are our policies to dispose of it? Things like that. And then that data flow is going to define your overall system, right? And you're going to need to do this kind of for each of your different contracts. That system is what is going to be the focus of this assessment, right? So when you contract with a third-party assessment organization, and when you think about the policies and procedures that you need to build around NIST 800-171, you need to think about it as that system. So identify the different people, the different processes, the different administrators, and things like that for each of those. As you build out that overall system security plan, please have the data flow diagrams, the network diagrams that provide the boundaries around that system. Because when you, as I mentioned before, when you engage with that third-party assessment organization, they're going to ask for you, okay, so what are we actually assessing? Are we assessing your entire organization? Are we assessing an enclave that you've built, be that a clean room in your facility where all of these activities around CUI take place? Certain workstations or certain groups in your organization? How do we draw that boundary? And what are those different affected systems? Are they all under your control? Are you using a managed a managed service provider, one of those external service providers? Are you utilizing a cloud service? How do you utilize that? How do you define the individuals and how they get access to those systems? All of those things will be part of that system security plan that you'll provide to that third party, and that you'll write those policies and procedures around when you think about defining that overall system for your compliance with NIST 800-171. Now, as we start to talk about building those policies, when you start to think about something like Policy Pro, it provides you those templates around each of those different 14 control families. You then customize those to fit your organization. It comes as a SaaS solution because as CMMC changes over time, and it will change over time, right? As I mentioned, NIST 800-171 has already gone from Rev 2 to Rev 3. So you'll see changes when the DoD decides to go to Rev 3. You'll also see changes because, even CMMC has changed over the years. It was, when it was first discussed, it was Rev 1. Now it's CMMC Rev 2 as well. So all of those things will change, and you'll want to not only edit and keep up to date your policies, but you'll also need to periodically review these policies. They'll need to go through a periodic review from your leadership and things like that. So as you do that, you'll want something like Policy Pro to ensure that you keep them in sync, that you understand the changes, that you get that feedback from the system to know what changes you need to make. And that's what David will show you as part of the demonstration. So with that, I will turn it over to David and let him show you how this all works.
Thank you, Kevin. So as Kevin mentioned, Exostar's Policy Pro is a SaaS-based solution designed to help you and your organization get compliant around the various requirements that your business faces. as you try to comply with the various regulations and standards that you'll need to meet in order to continue doing business. Regardless of where your organization is in your cybersecurity journey, whether you're just getting started out, maybe you don't have any of those policies and procedures that Kevin just mentioned, or maybe you're further along and you already have all of your existing policies in place. Um, we'll be able to help assist you through the various features and functionalities of the tool. We'll start off using our policy builder, and this is the first step in the platform and where you'll come to if you need some or all of the documentation for policies and procedures for your CMMC program. The first time through on the platform, you'll receive this pop-up here, and it's a brief explanation of what policies are, as well as some of those documents that are required for compliance. For example, documents such as your gap assessment, risk register, your POAMs, which is that plan of actions and milestones, as well as your SSP, your system security plan. You can download those documents if you don't have them already, and that will provide you a simple template to help you create those documents. But if you need further assistance on either of those two documents, the POAMs and SSPs, as well as some other features, Kevin will talk about another companion product that's part of the bundle, and that'll help assist you with some of these other documents. Moving on to the policies themselves, we'll be walking through an example of CMMC 2.0 Level 2. And once you've selected the policy domain you're interested in, that's going to take you to this Prepare, Gather, and Consult page. This is everything you're going to need to prepare prior to even getting started with the actual policy writing. For example, it could include things like gathering your organization's documents, records, and other materials related to these various access control topics. Additionally, who you may want to consult with, whether they are internal or external stakeholders. For example, it could include people like your network administrator, head of IT, or CISO, and then any sort of outside contractor if you do utilize them. So those will include your ESPs, the external service providers, which includes people like or organizations like your MSPs and your MSSPs. Once you have all of that prepared, you'll then go to our policy template. And all of our policy templates are broken out into a couple different sections. We've got the header here, which includes your organization name, the department or departments this policy falls under, the issue date, approved by, and the tracking number. The tracking number can be used in a number of ways. However, as you work on updates and revisions to your policies, you can update that tracking number accordingly. The other sections include the purpose, the scope, and the individual practices. And so in particular for level 2, you're going to be working on 110 practices associated with those 14 policy domains. Before moving on to the practices, which is where the bulk of your work is going to be done, I did also want to mention for those that still need the NFO and NCO controls, we do have those available as well. So you can access those templates right above the practice section, and you'll be able to create the NFO and NCO controls as well. Moving on to the practices, there's a couple of key pieces of information here that will be relevant and helpful as you're working through each template. And because the practices are broken out into each of its individual sections here, underneath each section, there's going to be some guidelines, and the guidelines will help you understand exactly what sort of information is typically included in that practice, as well as kind of in plain English, explain exactly what that particular practice is about. Once you're ready to begin, you'll click on this pencil icon here located on the right-hand side, and that's going to bring up our policy for 3.1.1. We can see that it's going to be about our organization's account creation, work from home, and bring your own device policy. A couple notes as you're working through these policy templates. One, you want to ensure that you're reading through the entirety of this template because what's written here in our templates should really reflect what your organization has actually implemented or what your organization plans to implement in the future based off your policies. Additionally, there's certain sections you want to pay particular attention to as you're working through them in order to customize it to what it is you've actually implemented. So an example of that is here in the first paragraph where it talks about all account creations will be submitted by the requesting department manager to the IT support email address for completion using the account request ticketing system or other process. So there, depending on whether or not your organization is actually utilizing a ticketing system, or if not, whatever other process it is you're utilizing to actually create those accounts and handle the requests, that's what you want to make sure to fill in that section there. We've also made a number of enhancements recently to our policy builder, and it will improve the productivity and collaborative nature of policy builder. So if you do utilize or add additional users onto the platform, whether they're internal or external, for example, an MSP, you can add comments and mentions in order to facilitate the policy writing process and ensure it goes a little bit smoother, as well as everything is already kind of formatted in that policy domain and then the practices. So it kind of formats easily into CMMC. We've also added a number of other features which you can access via the three dots here. Another new feature is version history, and this goes into something that Kevin mentioned earlier as well, is that periodic review and updating of your policies. So as you work on revisions and updates, our platform will keep track of all of the previous versions of your policy documents. And so you'll be able to see those previous versions. You can go back, but it's a great way to show evidence of your activities, especially of your activity of periodically reviewing and updating your documents. Once you've gone through all of the different sections here in Policy Builder, you're going to then export this document. And it's going to do a couple things. It's going to combine all of those sections I mentioned previously, so the header, the purpose, the scope, and the individual practices, into a single access control document that will then be saved as a Word document to your local hard drive. And that's important because it's also, well, there's two reasons it's important. One, I always recommend multiple areas that you're storing your policies. So one locally, one in cloud-based, so something like in Policy Pro. And it's also an important step prior to the next feature of the platform, which is policy assessment. Policy assessment is where you're going to come to assess and analyze your documentation to see if there are any gaps that might exist in your policies, help you address those gaps, and also as the standard changes, whether that's the NIST 800-171 revision 3 coming out and being added into CMMC. Regardless, you want to make sure to periodically review and assess your documents through policy assessment. We'll go ahead and upload a document here together, and there's a couple different ways you can upload a document. For example, let's say you've used our policy builder and you've exported that. You can definitely upload that policy template into policy assessment. And another way might be if you already have existing documentation, you don't have to go and use our template to create another policy. You can simply use your existing policies and assess it and make sure that there are no gaps. Additionally, it's very flexible in terms of not just being able to upload, let's say, an access control policy, which you may or may not have. You might have existing documents that relate to access control. For example, maybe you have an acceptable use policy or an account creation policy, maybe a clear screen policy, so you can upload multiple documents. And once you've uploaded those documents, we're going to be able to assess and analyze that document. You'll click on this detailed scorecard here, and we assess your document both at a high level as well as a granular level. At the high level, for this particular document, it appears relevant in size, scope, and organizational customization. The overall assessment is comprised of three different metrics. The relevance, which is how many key terms or phrases are included in your documents. The higher the relevance is, the higher the overall assessment will be. The model similarity compares the policy you've uploaded to our model documents. And we do that for two reasons. One, to ensure it's been appropriately customized to fit your actual organization's implementations, as well as ensuring it's covering everything it needs to cover. Finally, the word count is simply to ensure there's enough context surrounding those key terms and phrases to accurately assess your document. So if it's too short, chances are the overall assessment as well as the overall score might not necessarily be an accurate reflection of your documentation and how it's doing. In terms of the overall score, here you can see it's a 63.6%. However, it's not like an academic score, meaning 90% as an A, 80% as a B. It's a relevance scoring system, meaning anything above a 50% shows a relevant document. But I'll tell you how you can utilize the overall score to gauge both how your policies are doing currently, as well as how your policies are doing over time. So that's at the high level of how my uploaded documents are, but we also provide some granular feedback as well in terms of exactly what are the gaps in my policy and how can I actually improve it. And we do that through our key elements not included, or Kenny for short. And we have two different types of Kennys, the control Kennys as well as general Kenny terms. My first example of a control Kenny is going to be CUI non-public information. That is that key term or phrase that's missing in my document that I should be looking to incorporate in my next revision. Underneath that, I see some additional information, and that is the actual practice that that key term is associated with. In this case, it's 3.1.22, and so I haven't appropriately addressed this CUI non-public information in my documentation. We also provide the discussion requirements, which comes directly from CMMC, which again are derived from the NIST 800-171 revision 2 controls. But this makes it simpler in terms of instead of having to flip back and forth between the platform and the standard, you can directly read exactly what that particular discussion is about the practice. The documents for examination are going to be other sorts of documents, records, or materials that your organization might have that relate to that particular control Kenny. So if you need some additional guidance in terms of building out that control Kenny, you can look to these documents for examination. Also, once you've actually incorporated it into your policies and you've implemented it, these documents for examination can also be used as your evidence, as your artifacts that prove your actual implementation. And you'll be able to show that to the C3PAO to show your actual adherence to those various practices. The general policy Kenny terms are very similar in the sense that they're also key terms and phrases that are missing in my document. However, you'll notice there's no collapse all, expand all button with the additional information. And the reason for that is these are not tied to a specific control. They're more generic to the policy domain, in this case, an access control policy. Once you've gone through that process and you're happy with the assessment, you're then going to click on this management approved button, and that's going to do a couple things. And we'll talk about it further in the dashboard. So the dashboard is where you'll come to see all your progress and work throughout the platform, whether you're creating policies in Policy Builder or assessing policies in Policy Assessment. All of that work is going to be reflected here in the dashboard. Additionally, here in the green check mark, you'll notice the most recently management approved policy, as well as who approved it and when. So that goes to, again, the requirements that senior officials have to have to affirm of your CMMC program. And one way to keep track of that, one way to make sure that everyone in your organization is following the same set of policies, the most up-to-date policies, as well as that they've been management approved, and being able to actually prove that they've been management approved. You can utilize this feature and functionality of the tool. You'll see any previously management approved policies here in the blue check mark. And as you're working on incorporating those Kennys into your documentation, you'll notice the Kenny numbers going down and the overall score going upwards. Again, as long as it's above a 50%, you have a relevant document, and gauge how your policies are doing over time with the increasing scores, but doesn't have to be a specific percentage. The more important number to focus on is addressing as many of those pennies into your policies as possible. Lastly is our reference library, which contains various resources and guidelines, mostly directly from the NIST Institute, but it's a great way to get additional information. So let's say one of your Kennys was related to VPNs, and you're unsure how to address it in your policy. You can come here to the reference library and select the appropriate link, and that'll take you to the NIST guidelines on VPNs. So it's a much better way than trying to Google for the information, and you might get some inaccurate information or potentially outdated information. So utilizing this reference library will give you the up-to-date information on all of the relevant topics. Everything in today's demo was done for level 2. However, we do have level 1 available on the platform as well. So if you select that level 1 here, that's going to switch it to the 6 different policy family domains and the 15 practices associated with that. Hopefully that's been a helpful overview about how to utilize the tool. I'm going to be turning it back over to Kevin, who has a couple more items to talk about. Thanks everyone for your time and attention and taking a look at today's demo.
Thank you, David. There we go. So as David mentioned, Policy Pro is part of Exostar's CMMC Ready suite. It includes a companion product, Certification Assistant, which is really where you manage that overall CMMC program. That's where you can actually go through each of the individual controls, put in your implementation statements, put in your evidence that supports how you're fulfilling that particular implementation statement. If you don't have a control implemented, you can mark it as such. That'll spawn the POAM for that. You can then assign that out to somebody in your organization to address, track that to closure. It also provides task management of those recurring tasks around the CMMC program. So as I mentioned, it really is where you manage that overall effort around the program. If you're looking for an enclave to process, store, or transmit controlled unclassified information, Exostar's solution for that is our managed Microsoft 365 solution. That solution is an enclave up in GCC High based on the Microsoft Teams application with an Exostar application embedded within it. That provides those physical and logical controls for individuals to only get information to which they have rights to see. And it's maintained there within their browser. And that, if you will, shrinks down that overall system boundary and allowing you to keep it there in the enclave where Exostar control or manages 85 of those 110 controls of NIST 800-171. Now, if you're looking for a CMMC assessment, either that third-party organization to come out and do the formal assessment or a services organization to help you prepare for that, Exostar has a number of partners who utilize the Exostar applications to assist you in that overall goal of applying CMMC readiness. So we can put together packages that address all these things or just one area that you need. Exostar also hosts a number of educational sessions and webinars. We've got a number upcoming Every Thursday, if you'd like to see our Managed Microsoft 365 application, we hold a demonstration of that. So go to our website and sign up for that. That's every Thursday at 2 o'clock. We have a monthly general topic CMMC webinar that can be found on our events pages at exostar.com. We obviously have the Policy Pro session here. We also, David hosts a weekly workshop on Policy Pro. If you're a current user or you have questions, you need some tips on use, things like that, he can answer those there. We also, obviously, when you get this slide deck, you'll get a list of additional resources to help you out throughout this process. So I saw Joey answering chat and questions as they came over, so I want to thank him for doing that as we talk today. I want to thank you all for joining us, and if you have any questions, please reach out to us. We'd be more than happy to help you kind of wherever you are in your CMMC journey. Thanks again, and have a great rest of the day.